All right, all right. We are 2 minutes early. What do they say? To be early, to be on time is to be early. To be early is to be on time. That's what they say. To be on time is to be late. So we are on time today, y'all. Hello, hello, hello. Good evening. Finally, the sun came out here in Richmond. It has been great all week long. The sun
Yeah.
literally just came out, and it's got my spirits lifted. So I'm hyped today, y'all. I'm so glad that you all can join us today for my fourth and final, but certainly not least guest, Fahari Makini from Uzima LLC. And we're going to talk today about restorative practices. And just to give you a little soundbite, Fahari and I worked together at the All Girls Middle School, and she was the director of climate and culture there, and really refined her practice, like her
Mhm.
practice for this work, right? This is I think that is a place where she really um became like this what's the word that they use when you're working in your zone of genius. She found her zone of genius when she was working in that role. I feel like that's where it really blossomed for her, and she really took it all with both feet and just dug right into all the learning that needed to occur. And since then, people have been reaching out to her knowing that she is a force to be reckoned with when it comes to restorative practices and culture and climate in schools. And you'll see what I'm saying, because once she starts talking and you hear that smooth, baritone voice, you're gonna be like, yeah, you're gonna feel calmer too. Trust me when I tell you, okay? So this title, Restorative Practices Are Not a Quick Fix. Why Leadership Fails Without True Accountability. It's a common misconception that restorative practices are an easy solution, right? While calling out leaders that lack the accountability, the follow through on accountability is a key theme from my book as well, right? You having to follow through with things. So let's dive into some conversations with Fahari and find out a lot more about what she does working with schools and working with teachers. So Fahari, can you start by telling us, first of all, thank you for being here. And can you
Yeah.
start by
Thank you.
telling us a bit about yourself, the work that you're doing with Uzima LLC, and
Yes. Hi.
what inspired you to focus on restorative practices? And then, as
Mm.
a third part, how has this journey shaped your approach to leadership and education?
Yes, yes. Hey, everybody. I'm so excited to be here. This is personal for me because Demi is the best leader that I've ever had. Let me start by saying that. So I'm excited to just be in conversation with you today. Um,
Thank you.
so starting off, I'm Fahari Makini. I am CEO, founder of Uzima LLC, which is an educational consulting firm that I started. Actually, I think I've said this to you before, Demi, when I was working with you, right? At our school, you mentioned to me one day in a meeting we were having, and you said you need to do this bigger than this, and I had no idea what that meant. And you said you need
Mhm.
to start a consulting business, and I couldn't think of like what consulting, what does that even look like,
Right.
um, and didn't even let it kind of mingle with me any longer. I heard it, I heard you, and then I went on with my business. But when COVID hit, I started talking more about it. And then I always share the story. My husband, he heard me talking. He saw the name that I wanted, and he, as an Earth Day gift, he actually created and got my LLC registered. And that was the shift to now. Here I am in my going on my second year full time in my
Beautiful.
business, and
Yes.
so
Yes.
your inspiration, and then my husband just kind of pushed to challenge me and get me out in the forefront has really been the focus for me. And what
Beautiful.
started my inspiration, I want to say I've been in education for, I don't look it, but 18 years, I want to say,
Wow.
in
Nice.
various capacities.
Mhm.
And my friends always tell me, like, you've been doing this work before people were calling it or really having the trend of it being restorative practices. And they would always give me reminders of when I was in schools where I had accountability circles, and we weren't saying restorative circles at that time. I literally was saying every Wednesday I was circling my girls up for
That's right.
accountability. They were talking about things, and starting that way, I think, really shaped who I wanted to be as an educator. I always wanted to be an attorney, so I started out in youth detention because I always wanted to meet the youth who struggled the most. And then I realized I wanted to go into social work because I wanted to meet them before they
Right.
got to the detention center. And so it's always just been in my heart. I believe that it's hard
Yeah.
work. I have educators in my family from generations, and I believe I'm following in footsteps that I didn't know and realize that I actually began to take
Yes.
throughout my journey. So here I am.
Yeah. Yeah, that's beautiful. I love that. I love that. Because it really speaks to, how you are connecting to, I love how you said this heart work, right? Because it's
Hmm.
connecting to the things that you really are passionate about, right? And
Yep.
that is the driver for you in this work that you're doing, which is one of the reasons you're so good at it. And it's one of the reasons why you are you're enjoying it so much where it doesn't feel like work,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
I love that. I love that. Can you share with us how do you see restorative practices influencing the leadership's decision-making processes? Because there's a direct connection. People think that, what
Mm-hmm.
the school leader does and the decisions that they make don't have anything to do with, the
Yep.
how the adults are building culture, but there's a direct connection. How do you see restorative practices influencing that?
Well, I always believe that one, you cannot have a restorative school if the leader themselves aren't restorative in nature, right?
Right.
And so I know that it's becoming so trendy, honestly. It has been over the few
Mm.
years, and now it's kind of digging a bit deeper within schools and school
Yeah.
districts. And so for me, I look at school. The first decision that they have to make is not I want to have restorative practices in my school. I want to do circles, but I want to be restorative, right? So I want to be a restorative human
Mm.
first, before you can start asking school leaders, school staff, teachers, families, and students even to start the process of implementing restorative practices. Because a lot of times we can say that we are restorative schools and we are not. Just because we implement circles does
Right.
not make you a restorative school. And so, how then do we go beyond that aspect of it? And the way that you truly do that is for leaders to make the decision that they are going to get the training, they are going to get the coaching, they are going to do the research around what it really means to shift who they are from their mindsets, from that traditional punitive the piece of it, to now
Yeah.
I want to be a restorative person for my school community. And what that looks like is, what does the space look like when they walk in the building? Do students
Mhm.
feel welcoming, right? Like, it starts at those decisions before you can start getting even on the continuum of RP. Like, before I start looking at how do I start using restorative language and affective statements, how am I showing up as a leader first to
Yes.
make those decisions?
Yes.
And then we can
Yes.
kind of start talking about, okay, I have what I need. And so now I can support my students, staff, and families with what they need when it's time for dealing with relationships, when it's time with building relationships, and then addressing conflicts, of course.
Yes, yes. I love that how you said that. It's restorative human first, right? And
Mm-hmm.
I think
Yep.
about, like, I talk about this in my book in phase 1, Mind the Gap, where the gap is actually the disconnect between the values that you have as a human being and your
Mm,
actions as a leader. And so that's where the gap lies. And when you are not being restorative as a leader, like, you haven't
yep.
tapped into those values and things that, like,
Yep.
who am I in this work? Like, am I
Mm-hmm.
restorative as a human being first before I'm even asking that of my staff and of my
Yep.
students to be restorative when I'm not even that person, right?
Mm-hmm.
I
Mm-hmm.
love how you frame that with the being a restorative human first.
Yeah.
And so part of that, it sounds like what you're saying, leaders getting training and coaching also means that leaders need to, like, be steeped in a practice of deep reflection, right?
Yep.
Right? Deep reflection. And Dr. Mel just shared, like, the gap between intention and impact is real. And so in order to
Mm,
close that gap, that reflective piece is absolutely necessary. And I feel
yep.
like that's where leaders kind of miss the mark in terms of a lack of accountability with following through with it as well. Is if you don't
Mm-hmm.
set the time to really reflect on who you are as a restorative human first
Yep.
and what this looks like in your school, then
Mm-hmm.
you are missing the mark, right? Reflection
Yes.
is like, you talk a little bit about how you infuse these reflective practices when you are in schools working with leadership teams and teachers. What does reflection look like in the work that you do with them?
Mm-hmm. I think it's just honest conversation. That's where it has to start,
Mhm.
because a lot of times we can kind of play the game that, oh, it's okay, they didn't mean it that way.
Mm.
And I always look at it from the perspective of, if you can't reflect on the harm that you may be causing, even though the person that you're talking about doesn't hear it, if you can't still reflect on that, then you'll start to create this cycle of harm that you may not even think that you're creating, but you are,
Yes.
right? And so I
Yes.
look at it, you have educators who say things like, oh, I do not like that student, right? Like, we've all been there. But when you reflect on that statement, I always go back to, well, why are you here? Because as an educator, you come
Mm.
in
Mm.
to like and support, teach students, guide, mentor, however you want to call it, like children. And so to hear
Yep.
an educator say, I do not like students, the reflection now goes into, well, if that's the case, I'm not sure that you're the best person to be in this space at all, even with any student, right?
Right.
And the
Right.
reflection piece for that is, without judging or causing shame in that space for that educator who feels that way for some reason, is to flip it. Is it the student that you don't like, or is it the behavior that the student
Right.
is displaying that you don't like?
Mhm.
And so
Let's
it's
narrow
really
that
just,
down.
yeah, so it's about asking the necessary questions and really digging into, like, where those feelings coming from, in order to see that the students, children are going to make mistakes. They are not developmentally where you think or want them to be because they're bigger than you are, or because they talk a good game. Like, developmentally, they're still not there. Their brain isn't
Yes.
fully developed. Yours sometimes isn't fully developed, depending on how old you are as a teacher.
Right.
And
Yeah,
so
right.
all of
Right.
that all of those pieces together, you just have to learn how to, like, dig deep within yourself and not take it personal, in a sense that, I'm not saying you're a bad teacher. I'm not saying that you're not fit for this role, but I am saying that if you are unwilling to dig into your feelings and what it is that you speak of about children, about staff, about families, then that reflection is truly going to show up in your space. And it's either going to be a challenging year, or it's going to be a year where you know that those challenges will come, but you're willing to move forward and do what you need to do with students.
Yeah. Yes. That that reminds me of I was just working with a school in Baltimore City and talking to the staff around what you're saying, but using the lens of their values. And so I stick
Mm-hmm.
really, I talk a lot about values. Like phase one is all about values.
Mm-hmm.
First three
Yep.
chapters about values in different on different levels. And so it's really important for us as human beings to identify the
Mm-hmm.
values that we have
Yep.
and realize that when they are being pushed and violated, you're being triggered when
Mm-hmm.
someone is pushing and violating your values. And so I asked the staff of over 100 people, how many of them value respect? Like, what is that?
Mm.
Where do they hold that in regard of the levels
Mm-hmm.
of values? Most of them had them as number one or number two. It was in the top
Yep.
five, right?
Mm-hmm.
Everyone in the room raised their hand, over 100 people. And
Wow.
I asked them, and every day when you're working in schools, how many times during one day do you feel like you're being disrespected?
Mm-hmm.
So if you think about if you're holding respect as high regard in every single day, sometimes
Mm-hmm.
multiple times in one day, that
Yep.
value is being violated. You're
Yep.
being triggered as a human being, right?
Yeah.
And the ability to recognize that and know how to pivot, like this emotional intelligence piece is huge in restorative practice,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like,
Yep.
I asked them, like, I need you to think about how you will deal with that when you are violating. What you just described is adults' respect levels, their
Mm-hmm.
value of respect being violated, and they don't know how to react to that. And so they
Yeah.
make comments like what you just said,
Yep.
right?
And
And
I think
so
it also goes to, sorry,
I was gonna ask you a question, but go ahead.
no, I just wanted to pick up on that, because I think, even with that, I think a big part of it for leaders is to understand, like, exactly what you're bringing to the table,
Mhm.
right? Because even as a restorative leader, you don't know it all. And
Right.
so, unless you are able to know and understand that you don't have the answers to everything, then the way that it comes off to the teachers who may be struggling with implementation, the students who have never sat down face to face with someone that upset them, or that hit them, or that called them a name, right? If you don't understand that you're not in that moment have the capacity to deal with that, then your school can't be restorative because you're not even willing to own that you don't know right now. Right. And
Yeah.
so it's really
Yep.
for me about figuring out as leaders, how then do you figure out what it is that you're bringing to the table to know when you need to step back to get what you need so that you can really support? Because sometimes it may just need to be a pause when you truly reflect. When you
Right.
understand and can navigate through your feelings, your emotions, all of the things that will come up from the day-to-days of being in school settings, like you might want to just take a step back and say, hold on, we probably moved too fast here and we need to like go back and see
Yes.
what it is that's working and what's not.
Yeah, I love that you said that, and that leads perfectly into my next question, which is around emotional intelligence, right? So,
Mm-hmm.
how does restorative practices intersect with the development of emotional intelligence in leaders? And how do you
Mm.
help pull that out?
So I think a lot of it is not even for me, it's not even about pulling it out for leaders or for anyone, but it is about making them understand that you will feel something, or you should, because sometimes you may not. You should feel something in every interaction that you have.
Right.
And if you have that and not understanding too, a lot of people are like, no, I'm numb to it. Well, being numb is a feeling, right?
Yep.
And so
Mhm.
understanding where those feelings are coming from, the way that you kind of ease into that with them is just letting them know, like asking the necessary questions. And so when that student came in your office and said X, Y, and Z, cussed you out through the chair, what were you feeling?
Mhm.
Let's not talk about what happened. Just tell me what were you feeling in
Yeah,
that
yeah.
moment. And then you can walk through the process of, okay, what happened prior to so and so coming into your office? What happened when it happened? And then what's going to happen next? Because once you can reflect on every part of that feeling, then you can truly move forward to restoring whatever harm was caused in that space. Because I always also look at it like as parents, we have parents that come into our buildings, front office, they want the principal immediately. They don't want to talk to anybody else. They're not leaving the building unless they talk to the principal. And a lot of times we can get tired, right, of that. And so it'll be, I don't feel like, oh, I don't have time to deal with this. But in being restorative and understanding your emotional intelligence and your feelings and how you're going to process through that is the parent isn't the one you should be tired of because they're your partner in making sure
That's
that the
right.
student has what they need. And so
That's
even though
right.
it may be draining, they have the right to come into your space and ask the necessary questions to ensure that their children are also getting what they need. And so sometimes if they don't have the vocabulary, or they may not have the to come in with a little
Yes.
less frustration or anger, right? Or irate, like being irate, then you teach them how to do that and just be okay to have that conversation with them, because that's how you truly display a restorative leader. It's in
Yeah.
those disagreements or areas of conflict or confrontation that pops up that you have to be able to say, enough is enough. Let's have a conversation first about our interactions for us to actually move forward with having the conversation about your child and their progress.
Right, and so you're modeling when you say teach them as a
Yeah.
leader, you are
Hmm.
modeling for them how to have those
Hmm.
conversations, right?
Yeah.
And we
Hmm.
know because 'cause we've seen it, happening in live, right? Like,
Yes.
the inability in that moment for a person who's
Hmm.
emotionally charged to connect with
Yep.
their words, to, you know,
Hmm.
to
Hmm.
articulate how they are feeling in that moment is it's very challenging, but it also requires, the leader and the school team to really be, like, to not give up, to stay the course
Yep.
and continue to, you
Hmm.
know, model what these conversations look like. And a lot of times, having these conversations with the students, they will go home and model it for their parents or
Oh,
their whoever
yes.
is at home, right? Like,
Hmm.
using those stems and having those
Yep.
conversations. You remember what it was like. It was kind of like with
Hmm.
the girls, they didn't want to do it at first. Like, that's dumb. I don't want to do that. I don't want to
Uh-huh.
volunteer for that. And then at 3 months
Yep.
down the line, they're asking for VOMs,
They're
right? They're
requesting
the
a
ones
bump. Right. Yep.
who are reminding us that they need to engage in that practice,
Hmm.
because it does take the modeling for that to
Yeah.
happen. I appreciate you sharing that.
And I
So
think one thing that we did within our space too was that we didn't just do it with the children. So
right,
when students had issue with teachers and staff, like they were vamping too, right? Like they were sitting down and having restorative conversations with each other. And some teachers may not have liked that because it's hard for adults to have to own when they cause harm to a child. But
that's
that's the
right.
importance of no, if we're going to be a restorative space, then everybody is going to own whatever
Everybody.
harm they cause in this space. And when you harm a child, even if it wasn't intentional, that impact is still there. And so expect them to walk into your space not believing that they can have trust in you or faith in you to do what's right for them if you aren't even willing to hear them out when they say you harmed them or you hurt their feelings, and for you to own that and apologize as necessary.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. So, what do you think are some common challenges leaders face when implementing restorative practices, and how can they overcome them? What is one or two things that you would share with folks to say this is how you can overcome some of these challenges?
Yeah, I think a lot of it is around leaders believing that they don't have the time in the school day to do it, right? But I think that comes from believing that restorative practices is solely circles, that restorative
Hmm.
practices is solely conflict resolution methods. And because of that, then you feel that you don't have the time. But in reality, the issue is you always have the time for what you want to have the time for. And so you just have to figure out how to include in your schedule, whatever that looks like,
Yep.
if it's circles, right? If it's that affective language, because the time again, it's not just that. I look at restorative practices as it's not what you do. Again, it's who you are when you walk into the space, right? And
Hmm.
so it's the way of being in that school. And so the time is a challenge, but it's really not. It's an excuse, right? And so it's about
Say that
wanting to
again
dig
for the
in.
people in the
I
back.
said, I had said
Say it
that
again.
time is not a challenge. It is an excuse. And that's the
Hmm.
reality of it, because and that's
Absolutely.
just personal and professional, right? Like you make time for what you want, you make time for what you prioritize, you make time for what's important to you. And if we really want to build schools that are cultures of care, we really want to build schools where children feel safe, where they feel heard, where they feel valued and seen, then they will always make sure that you develop the time for what's needed. And so
Yeah.
that's a whole nother topic in itself. But and I'm gonna tell you, and I always talk to people about you being very intentional with the way that you created schedules for our school, because that if an intervention was necessary, I don't care about nothing else going on throughout. I'm gonna flip the whole schedule around, and you made it a practice to make sure that children came first. And so the schedule wasn't a problem. And so that's what I mean. Like if it's important, then you'll find the time. And if that means
Yeah.
going back to that schedule, to that drawing board and figuring it out for next semester, then you go and you do that.
Yep. Yep.
I think another challenge would be trying to figure out how to have staff invest in the belief of restorative practices. And while that's a challenge, and I don't say buy in, because I believe that you don't want them just to buy in, because you can give away something you buy, right? Or
Right.
you can return it. You can return it to the store. And so for me, how then do we make sure that the staff want to invest in what we're putting down? And the only way that you can do that is really being intentional with what it is that you're telling them you're doing and why. Like start with why this is important for your school, not why it is big across the country, not why it's big for youth detention, not why it's big for a lack of suspensions, but specifically what is it going to do for your school population? Where
Yes.
if we do this, this is where we are going to be as a school, not for anybody else, but for the purposes of the students in our space, for our families, for our staff, this is where we want to be. And
Yep.
so it's really just figuring out how to do that, and build that investment in them, and just being real with them. Start before you can have teachers invest in with something like restorative practices. You have to first be in it with them. And so I always say, like, have staff circles, like have staff, the way you communicate with staff who may not be meeting the expectations as a teacher, as a staff in that building is important, because if you communicate with them in a non-restorative manner, but yet the same email, you want them to communicate with families and students in a restorative email, and there's no balance there. And right now
Yeah.
you're just being a hypocrite to them. Um,
Absolutely.
and so those are just
Absolutely.
some of the challenges, I think.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you for sharing that. It reminds me of I was at the SREB conference, and there was a gentleman
Mm,
who was sharing, I forgot his name. He's a teacher at a charter school there in Atlanta. Um but the charter school has a selective process, so they really don't count.
mm,
But he's a phenomenal speaker. I can't remember his name, Michael something. Anyway, he made his statement was, as leaders, you can't withdraw what you
mm,
haven't invested in your staff. So we
Come
can't,
on.
like you said, you're being a hypocrite, right? You have to
Yep.
be able to put the investment in. What time, what energy are you putting into your staff? Are you walking the walk before
Mhm.
you're asking them to
Right.
do something that you have not done yourself, right?
Mhm.
And
Yep.
so it's so key for I think that is one of the things, like you said, to overcome any of those challenges is for you as the leader, right? This is the piece about accountability, which is our topic
Mhm.
today, is you as the leader have to model and show your entire school community that you are walking this walk. You are becoming,
Yes.
as you said, a restorative human first
Mhm.
before you're asking them to do that. I love how you brought that full
Yeah.
circle. So tell me how what do you think about how can leaders ensure that restorative practices become ingrained in the school culture? I know we
Mhm.
touched on it a little, but how can it be ingrained and sustained over time? Because you go into schools and you work with leaders and teachers, right?
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
um what kinds of things do you work with a leader to help the practice become sustainable over time so that
Yep.
this accountability piece is actually being met?
So I'll even start from the district level first,
Mhm.
because I think a lot of times in districts, it's easy to say we're now a restorative district, right? Because we don't
Check the
suspend as
box.
much, or instead of suspending, put them in school or whatever that may look
Mhm,
like. And so
mhm.
I think at the district level, the first thing that you want to do is, before you can say that you are a restorative district, like, use the language that you're moving towards becoming a restorative district. And the way that you actually step foot in that is, you don't have to try to push it out to every school in your district. I
Right.
always say, with the district that I work with, I always say they wanted to do a district wide implementation. I said, let's slow down. Let's start with a select set of pilot schools first. Like, let's figure out how we can implement these pieces and see it grow within these select schools, so that we can then start to level it out amongst other schools, and
Yeah.
then we move it into the different bands, right? So we can start with elementary schools, and then we can go into middle and then high. But if you do it all at once, then that's where that kind of talk from over sort of practice doesn't work, because we're rushing into the implementation phase.
Yeah.
Within schools, I would say, have someone in your space that is dedicated and committed to restorative practices. Not that that one person can and or should be doing it by themselves, but you should have a person in your space that is restorative in nature and that is going to build up a team. And so you can't just have an assistant principal, or a dean, however, whatever the titles are in your district or your school,
Mhm.
but you want to have them have the space to have a team to support them throughout that space. And so that can be a restorative leadership team, that can be a restorative culture team, whatever that may look like, so that they can start to build out these processes one at a time, not too many. And then you want to make sure that everybody in your space is actually trained. And when I say everybody, y'all, I'm talking about cafeteria workers need to be trained, because some
That's
of the ways
right.
I've seen cafeteria workers talk to children when they get in those lines are out of hand. And they should be trained in communicating with, how to communicate effectively with children. I mean, the janitors can be trained. Anybody that is
Absolutely.
engaging and interacting with your children in your schools need to be in your all staff training. Do not leave anybody out. Do not leave your school resource officer out if you have them in your building. Like, include everybody in the process, so that everybody is on the same page with how to engage and communicate with students, staff, and families. And then lastly, celebrate successes. It's not going to be a perfect rodeo. It's not a overnight journey. It's going to take time. Research says that it takes at least 3 years for
Right.
actual implementation for you to become a full restorative school. And so use the 3 years, plan it out, create an action plan. What does year one look like? What does year two look like?
Yes.
What does year three look
Mhm.
like? And then beyond that, right? And so you want to create an action plan that actually implements all the pieces that you are going to put in place for that year. What's the follow up going to be? How often are you going to measure it? Who's going to support you with measuring and following up? Involve students in that measurement process, because those are the students that you're trying to implement it with. And so have them be a part of the conversation, not just in the room. And then involve families, of course. Bring them in to be a part of that success. Bring them in to be a part of the conversation around what challenges they're seeing, that you're having, especially early on in the phase. And then just slow down. Like, I want y'all to slow down.
Mm,
You don't have to do it quickly. You don't have to rush to do it. You don't have to say no suspensions. I haven't had any suspensions this year, so we're restorative. Because if you still have 10 fights a day in your school, baby, we are struggling.
that's right.
And just
That's
because
right.
you took it off the table does not mean that you are actually addressing the root causes of that school. And so that's where you see the toxicity come in from staff culture. That's where you see the lack of climate where everybody is fighting. Nobody wants to be in the building, student, staff, and or families, and sometimes even the leaders. And so
Yeah,
just take
yeah.
a step back and slow down.
Yeah, I love that about slowing down. I was just on the live session yesterday. We were just talking about, slowing down is the antidote to the
Mm-hmm.
oppressive act of urgency, right? This sense of
Yes.
urgency, you always feel like you're
Mm-hmm.
behind the eight ball, so you're trying to rush things through and not really giving
Mm-hmm.
it the time and love that it requires. You just
Yep.
said a mouthful, honey. Let me just
I
tell
know.
you, you gave people a whole list of things that they can be doing to build and build a sustainable structure for restorative practices,
Mhm.
and really defining, breaking up the definition of like what it looks like, because a lot of folks are using incorrect metrics to say that they are
Mhm.
restorative schools, saying that,
Yep.
I don't have any suspensions. That doesn't mean you're restorative, like you said.
Mhm.
So you really broke it down for folks, and I truly appreciate it. And I'm gonna follow up um, with the post and kind of just highlight some of the things that you shared for the people, for the good people who are either
Yeah.
joined in or watching the replay. I want to thank them for doing that, and please share in the comments your thoughts around this. We want to keep this conversation going. We have to keep it going because we
Yeah.
have to disrupt the status quo here. That there are things that are
Mhm.
happening in schools with our children, especially our black and brown babies, that need to shift. We cannot keep doing things
Mhm.
the same way we used to. When you have people like Fahari Makini and the work that she's doing with restorative practices, right, like in the forefront of what's going on in school buildings and supporting leaders
Mhm.
and teachers. And I appreciate you for doing that. Can you please share how people can get in contact with you?
Yes, yes. This sun. Y'all see this light on me?
I
Um,
see you glowing, honey.
so you can reach me on Instagram and Facebook at Uzima LLC. That is at Uzima LLC. I'm also on LinkedIn under my name, Fahari Makini. And then, of course, you can visit my website, www.uzimaconsulting.com. And then email me, info@uzimaconsulting.com. If you have a question, if you want follow up to this conversation, even feel free to
Absolutely.
follow me on social media. Send me a message over there, and we can connect that way. I'm all excited about the work that I do. I believe in it. I love what I
Mhm.
do, and I do my best to make sure that schools and leaders and even educators and families have what they need to do the work too. So reach out. I would love to connect. And thank you, Demir. You are amazing, y'all. I'm telling y'all, she is the best, the best.
Thank, thank you. I did not plug her
Truly
to
a
say that,
model and
y'all. I'm just
inspiration. She
telling
did
you.
not. She don't have to. She don't have to. My
Well,
inspiration. I thank you.
I appreciate you. Courageous leaders, I need you to take
Yes.
heed of the conversation and the points that were mentioned today. R- Like, play this over again, because she was moving really fast at the end, dropping them nuggets. So I need you to replay it and catch those nuggets at the end. Like, getting, like, I won't even give you the list now, but courageous leaders, we are asking you to be restorative humans first. That is what
Mhm.
we're asking you to do. We're asking you to think outside the box, and we're asking you to slow down and take the time to, one, reflect for yourself about who you are as a restorative person, a human being, and what that looks like, and how you're passing that off, how you're passing the baton to your leadership team and your staff and your students and their families. So keep going, courageous leaders. You have a cloak of support here on the screen, and other folks that I'm sure that can support you as well. But keep going, and we appreciate you logging in and giving your comments and feedback. And we will speak to you soon. This is us logging out. Have a great evening. Fahari, you
Have
hold
a
on,
great
okay?
night.
You
Okay.
hold on, Fahari.